the SQL Server database security teams, why are they actually numerous? In the sense of mm, why we see actually our book, our definition here, it is defined to us for themes for to be actually the guide of this security, the secure by default, and the design where the security actually is set by design, or the security is set by default, or the security is set by default deployment, or the security is set by communications. Secure to secure not by communication, but to secure the communication itself. Those themes here, why they are numerous, why they are four, why they are not less or even more, why? Why you are seeing the variety, the segregation uh, here specifically and more precisely. This is an enhancement that Microsoft has set. This is an initiative that Microsoft has advised for, and this approach actually it is to enhance the security towards the SQL Server services. In the sense of whatever we talk about as a service that the SQL Server delivers, there will be actually a security function, or let's say functionality, or theme, or class, or namespace, group, task dedicated to such a specific functionality. This would actually enhance the trust towards the SQL Server usage. And it is actually not only commercialization aspect, but also it is a real fact, because on real plane, whenever we segregate the functions, it would be actually a compartmentalization approach, and then after we are securing the framework. Since the compartmentalization is an approach via which we use the intellectual capability to secure the environment. We segregate the roles, the functions, and the assigned privileges into smaller regions, to smaller sessions, to have a better control, and thereafter a better security, better results. Okay, we continue from where we start, but even though just a small recap to make you understand what this topic is about, even though the security actually on top of the SQL Server, here we are discussing specific and dedicated security setup, not only from the behavior, from the way how we implement our solutions. It's not only secure coding, but security approaches as per security, dedicated to security only. They are security functions. All what we saw so far, actually, 4 chapters, they are all discussing the enhancement and the security view of the technology behind the SQL Server. And that was behind the secure code, and mainly secure code and using the new technology, which is the TSQL usage, or the enhancement features, or all. But here in this chapter, we are going to see security functions dedicated to security only. I'll go a little bit further, and then after I'll come back to the initial, just to put you in frame. Actually, the first lab in this, the first practical we went through in this course, it was tackling the access and the login and the authentication process. And after the authentication process, we discussed the roles and the mapping of the users into the databases, and what they can do, what they cannot do. It was access control. So one of the very famous concerns in this chapter is the concern of the accounts, the sessions to be set on top of the accounts, whomever is allowed to use and whomever is not allowed to use, and no access even Beside of that, if authentication is awarded, there is an access control to be set up, which is the roles to set. So there are logins authentication, there are access control roles, and there is actually a specific and dedicated account to be utilized by everybody. Can be all the use. There is no limit, but it has to be actually uh, granted a minimum role, minimum privilege in order to be functional, which is the guest account. The guest account. So the system admin SA, the user SA, it was the default account, and we the administrator account, and we were able to create it when we installed the SQL Server. Beside of that, we were able to generate logins, user accounts, user names, and the way of access and the passwords. There were actually, those were logins, and we were able to use them to log into the SQL Server. So once we did, and once actually it is done, that was actually only an authentication process. Authenticated, they have been authenticated versus the system. And right after the authentication, we were able to discuss the roles and the mappings of the users with the database. Here we talk about the roles. Here we talk about the roles. What the user has to do inside the database or with the database. So this is the first overview of the chapter number. Of the full course even. But still, here we are tackling it again, just to remind and just to refresh. And this is a theoretical definition of what we have to do at the beginning and the initial step. I come back. Yeah. So concerning the themes that they are actually defined in the we were saying that they are actually one of the pillars to secure an SQL Server database. Those are 4 themes. And they are actually needed to be actually for a purpose to make actually people feel more comfortable using any device powered by a SQL Server based database. And as per the definition, and as per the definition of the those 4 themes that they actually define in the security on top of each transaction, on top of the SQL Server also. Talking about the secure by design, it's an approach via which we see the security that has been actually it is a design actually considered in all earlier versions of this SQL Server. Yes, absolutely, but via which actually we see that actually there are some resources being delivered to everybody, and other resources they are not delivered to anybody. This is due to the design. This is due to the design. It's sort of a restriction because of the design only. Remember the first security also we discussed in chapter number 1 when we defined the SSDT. We were telling that the security is the first security to tackle is the physical security. Yeah, it's the design here. Is the design here. For the secure by default theme, here we see that the secure by default approach is one of the most notable areas of the security framework in SQL Server users that actually life cycle, or let's say usage or experience. And this experience actually, it would help actually, it starts by the installation of the SQL Server with the by default setup without any modifications. Even to activate the SA, it's not to be set here. The secure by default is to just admit all the setups, the default setups when installing the SQL Server, and even without activating the default, the SA user. And here, actually, because of this default setup, and by setting up actually the default configuration to be admitted, there will be a limitation and a minimization of the attack surface towards the SQL Server, towards the full engine later on. So the attack surface to be tackled by attackers to attack any database you have in your project will be actually limited, will be actually controlled and limited by admitting the default setup. So secure by default. So here the SQL Server is secure by default. And when we talk about the deployment, it's a concern, it's a very challenging aspect, because here we are talking about the move from the offline to the online, because we are going to pass into a production environment. From an offline means you are just making tests, you are just making yes, tests, and let's say implementation even. But when you pass to the deployment, it is a context of a production environment, means it's a working environment. So it's a very challenging, because a working environment, it has so many circumstances and so many constraints. Amongst of them, the number of users. Amongst of them, the technologies used to reach the destination, means technology here, operating systems and software applications. And this is not to be actually admitted once for all, because the deployment needs a continuous follow-up. Which is actually making the task much more harder for the administrators. Another concern, another design, another approach, another theme, which is tackling the security of the communication, the communications in plural. Those communications actually whatever, because do not forget that all the units we saw so far, they are tackling the TSQL usage, and the TSQL is enhancing transactions only. So since the early age actually, and since 2005, the SQL Server has actually uh, supporting various, let's say, communication, let's say, functions in various forms. And but in all cases, actually, in all cases, the all the different available editions of the SQL Server today, they are all capable to give different features to protect the credentials of the candidates. Means whenever a candidate is passing a request to the database from his end, or receiving a response from the database to his end, there have to be actually a privacy limit, let's say a protection. And this, what this secure communication means, and is intended for it. because it's secure communications, it includes the authentication and the authorization. And the schemas to which users they are acting, it is considered with the secure communication. And also the secure communication requires encryption and decryption mechanisms to be active. It The secure communication, it helps to track the events or what is happening step by step. And this secure communication, it helps also, it enhances to secure the engine itself, the SQL Server itself. As per the definition of actually of the here the attack surface that we were talking, that would be actually minimized. When we talk about the secure by default, so the attack surface actually it is a concern via which we can see that the number of the entry points are a question of enlarging or limiting the attack surface, because as a real case, how many doors you have at home? You have one door only, one main gate. You have 2, you have 4, you have 10, you have n. As many doors you have in your home, as many you are exposed, and your security is not private. So here, the entry points actually, the example is given us actually to annotate that it is a door. And true, it is a door only, because when you say that there is an access, that there is something being sent and received, so there is an input. When you try to seek for and to search, this is an output. In all cases, there have to be actually an in-out access point, let's say, or port or entry point, via which we do eliminate the actually, or let's say not eliminate, but at least limit and reduce enormously the attack surface where attacks can behave. So, and here for the example of the let's say of the configuration that we have to set since the first practical, the user accounts and the access credentials. They are on top of the usage of the creation. They are on top of the creation of the user accounts, logins, and then after mapping up because those logins and those credentials, they have to be utilized for authentication. Once authenticated, there have to be actually concern of sessions generation. Those sessions, they would specify which user to access which resource. So here you see that the request to be sent, it has to be secured enough, and here you see the device that can be utilized to reach the resource, which is here, the schema here, database, and the access control is to be done on top of these functionalities. Here, the create, the alter, the drop, they are all SQL commands. They are all SQL commands. The combination of all enhances or draws a securable permission, let's say, model. This graph we see in front of us, it's a combination. It's not just a table to see and that's it. No, it's a combination that we have to annotate. Devices to use, sessions to adopt, and then after the resource. And in between the data in front, what is the as per this combination here, we'll be able to see a much more secure, technically speaking, a much more secure SQL Server based project. For the concern of the SQL logins, for the logins actually specifically and more precisely, um, we can say that the logins, they are a high level security in the SQL Server environment, means actually they are in priority, and they are a top priority, because without being authenticated you'll not be able to access the SQL Server. Whatever the API you use, SSMS, SSDT, or Visual Studio, or any, if you are not being authenticated, you'll not be able to access the resources. So the logins, they are a question for enabling such a behavior. And at the same level also, not only the logins that they actually enhance the security through, let's say, through the model we were seeing, but also contained databases actually, they are one of the yes considerations that have to be actually seen. And those contained databases, they are simple database available inside the database management system, the DBMS. Yet they do have actually capability to allow end users to be authenticated versus the database, not the database management system. The SSMS we use in lab, it authenticates you against the DBMS, database management system. But no, here we are, when we define the contained database, we talk about authentication against the database only, not against the database management system. Inside the database management system, which is the SQL Server, in our case, we might have 2, 3, 4, n databases. We have the students, we have the sales, we have actually colleges, and we have studies. We have actually different database pedagogical follow-up. We have different variety of databases. Yeah, yeah. So, uh, and by recognizing all of those perspectives, we may say, we draw clear understanding what the attack surface might be, or how the attack surface would look like. Because an attacker would have to use a vulnerability in order to attack. And the vulnerability here is the list of the weak access points where the security is not set, or at least where the security is very weak. So there the attacker would start from. And see, as per the first example we see here in front of us, administrators, if they lack the experience, they are opening a big chance for the attackers to attack you. Here, actually, to draw your attention only that the human factor is one of the considerations to draw a secure interface for the SQL Server. The human factor, the intellectual capability of an administrator is a question. If the administrator is poor in such a consideration, and if he is in a vacation also. So thus the experience will not be seen. and this is an entry point for an attacker, list of attackers. Default passwords, usually they are not admitted, but whenever you install SQL Server, you activate the system admin with a new password, and also you have to do the same for all the users and the logins. They have to be actually secured with a password in order to be safe enough to guarantee that all users they access with their own credentials. The SQL Server actually can be as a service, can be utilized over the web. There are logins to use the SQL Server on top of the SQL Server, no? So the browsers they are actually to be utilized. They can be utilized to manifest the request of each user. Means we do not need only the SQL Server Management Studio, the SQL Server Data Tool, or the Visual Studio only. No, we can see the results over a browser. The same scenario, the same results we were discussing all the time, but over a browser. So it's over the www. So the SQL Server can run on the over the www. The answer is yes. A very famous concern that it is one of the members, the big members from within the attack surface is the SQL injection or the injections in general. In our case, injections, but in our case, we are talking about the SQL injection specifically. SQL injection. Scenario via which falsified queries will be submitted over an input point to hack an account. SQL injection is the adoption of the technology itself. It's to use the SQL only. The most danger side of the SQL injection is that the engine uses the SQL to communicate. So the SQL injections, they are the usage of the SQL only. So how the system will recognize that injections are considered here. The expertise, as per the first point here, we said that the weakness of the administrator, the same way, the expertise, which is seen over the intelligent summaries, is one of the considerations that an administrator or SQL Server administrator has to look after. Yes, great. And at this level only, we re-insist again and again that the security starts with the control of the users based on their access and their usage. Their access means they have to be actually usually authenticated here inside the environment, and they have to be actually clearly identified. And from the other side, which is the service-wise, they have to be able to use databases, and they have to be using passing queries, or the vice versa. They have to be controlled to access the environment, and they have to be controlled to use the food available. So whatever we may say, the food or the content, the data inside the SQL Server. So here, sorry, comes in action the logins, roles, and also we might talk about the contained databases or the guest accounts. We might talk about the contained databases or the guest passwords. Logins to generate a login a user with its username and the password. Roles is to map a given or dedicated user to a specific database. Computer A is willing to access database, so yes. Computer B is willing to access database, so yes, and so on. So it's a track. It's a role to do and to give, but to whom? To somebody you track. Who is going to log into the database? A user. Who is going to have a role on top of a database? Also a user. Who is able to access 24 hours but without being authenticated as a guest? Also a user, one of the users. So here actually those considerations here, they are musts. You as a developer, you as a database security administrator, you have to consider that the first security you present and discuss, it is the control of the users, the sessions, the roles, and let's say the mappings. What the user has to, if logged in, what he has to do and what he has not to do. What are the resources that he is pointed to, that he is able to use, and without omitting and without stating and stressing on the use of the guest accounts and the the guest functionalities, let's say. Any questions at this level, please? Any questions here?
No, Master.
We will be discussing the authentication and the authorization clearly and with more details, and also we'll present the encryption scenario, how to encrypt the database content. Beside of that, actually, at the end, we'll be able to do an audit. An audit means you are going to make an analysis on top of the SQL Server. Please refer to the book for any other details. Please refer to the book usually.